Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us on this Friday afternoon. Just a reminder to please go on mute unless you are speaking, and then we are going to get started. So hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today for this event. My name is Nicole Parker. I am currently the Director of U.S. Outreach for the Journal of Science Policy and Governance. I want to provide you a brief background on JSPG for those who may not be familiar with the journal. So we're putting our website in the chat. We are an internationally recognized open access peer-reviewed publication. We cover every corner of science and technology policy. Through the journal, we bolster research and writing credentials for early career scholars in science policy and encourage them to engage in policy discourse and debate. We publish op-eds, technology assessments, policy memos, and analyses, white papers, book reviews, workshop proceedings, and other research articles. We also promote the publications through our global mailing lists and events, such as workshops, webinars, and a podcast where we interview our published authors. You can follow JSPG on all the socials, so Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And we also have a YouTube channel where we will post all of our recordings, and we'll post today's recording as well. If you want to follow us, we're going to post all of our accounts in the chat, and there's also a link to our newsletter subscription list. So please sign up so you can keep up to date with our future events. So last month, the Journal of Science Policy and Governance and Sigma Xi launched a call for op-eds and policy position papers, inviting students, postdocs, policy fellows, and early career researchers to consider ways we can re-envision STEM education and workforce development for the 21st century. And this call for papers has a submission deadline of January 23rd, 2022. This webinar is the last of the 3 webinars that will engage thought leaders in the field to discuss the most important topics for the next generation to focus on. They'll also showcase impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on the STEM education and workforce field and design the future of this field from a policy standpoint, taking into account equity and inclusion, access to technology, and aligning training opportunities with workforce demands. We encourage all of our participants to live tweet about this webinar, and please tag us when you do. And we are definitely planning to reach out to those who tweet to have an opportunity to share their impressions about this event for our upcoming JSPG blog piece on this. So this webinar in particular will focus on enhancing career and technical education for students in community college and supporting their upskilling to enter the STEM workforce and broadening the skill sets provided at all levels to prepare students for the new work environment. This webinar was organized in collaboration with JSPG's Senior Advisor, Shalin Jyotishi. So with that introduction, we can move into today's events. Please mute and turn off your video if you are not one of our panelists. Today, we will have a panel discussion with distinguished leaders in the career, technical, and community college space. This panel will be moderated by Shalin Jyotishi, who is a senior policy analyst for the Center of Education and Labor at New America, and he also serves as our senior advisor to JSPG. Shalin's expertise centers on public problem solving, where higher education, the workforce, technology innovation, and science and innovation policy converge. Prior to joining New America, Shalin led research and programs at the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities. And he's also held policy positions at the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the University of Michigan. He's also held consulting roles with AAAS, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, and the International Monetary Fund. Shalin also serves on numerous other advisory boards, and his full bio can be found via the link that was just placed in the chat. You can also follow Shalin on Twitter, and you can take a look at his personal website that has also been placed in the chat. So today we have a excellent group of panelists that will be introduced by our moderator. And you can follow our panelists and their organizations by taking a look at the links in the chat. And please do follow our panelists on Twitter. During the panel discussion, feel free to ask any questions in the chat for our speakers, and you can place them in the general chat or send them to me or Adriana directly through private chat. And with that, I will turn things over to Shalin.
Thanks very much, Nicole. Really excited to be with you all today. Thanks so much for joining. As Nicole mentioned, STEM ed and workforce development has long been this hot button topic in the science and tech policy community, but usually when we go to AAAS or the National Academies or another SciPol conference of your choosing, the focus tends to be on reforming undergraduate education or graduate education or postdoc reform. And then of course, K through 12 comes up a lot with, oh gosh, computational literacy, math and science education, so many different things. Over the years, hundreds of initiatives on STEM ed and workforce training have popped up, from the White House to big tech companies to grassroots efforts in states and cities and localities. But sometimes the role of community colleges in STEM ed and workforce development in comparison gets a little bit less airtime in the science policy space, despite the critical role they play in fostering an equitable, skilled technical workforce, especially for these middle skill jobs where you need more than a high school diploma, but maybe less than a bachelor's degree. Community colleges and the programs they offer are also really important because not everyone will or wants to get a bachelor's degree. About 32 to 35% of adults over 25 hold bachelor's degrees in the US. And the pandemic really derailed education plans for many people, especially first gen students, racial minorities, and actually men had a steep decline due to the pandemic. With advocates like Dr. Jill Biden and the White House and the various proposals on free community colleges and the Endless Frontier Act and all the derivative bills now coming a little bit closer to reality, now more than ever, I think you all have a great opportunity to elevate the visibility of community colleges as good partners with 4 years and K through 12 in the STEM ed and workforce ecosystem. That's why we have this great panel here today. We have perspectives from private industry, from federal government, and from the community college state government lenses. All three have lots of ideas to share on STEM ed and workforce training reform at this community college focus level. And in addition to their sectoral lenses, each of our panelists is also an expert in specific segments of the labor market that's really critical for US STEM ed and workforce reform. We have healthcare expertise with Vaughn, we have manufacturing expertise with Marianne, and we have tech IT expertise with Amy. And I'll now turn to briefly introduce these leaders so that you can get a little bit of a sense of their perspectives, their context, and how you all might be able to lean on them as you write your submissions. So we have the speaker card up on screen. As Nicole said, definitely recommend you all follow these good folks on Twitter and LinkedIn. I learned a great deal from them, and I know you all will as well as you prepare your submissions for JSPG, but then also beyond. So first and foremost, we have Ton-Quinlivan. Vaughn is a nationally recognized thought leader in workforce development. She is currently the CEO of the nonprofit Futuro Health and previously was executive vice chancellor of the California Community Colleges, which is actually the largest higher ed system in the nation. While she was there, she grew public investments from 100 million to more than 1 billion by establishing workforce as a state priority. Before academia, Vaughn led workforce development in industry for PG&E. She's on the board of the National Skills Coalition, the National Student Clearinghouse, Putting America Back to Work Venture Fund, and has been named a White House Champion of Change. She recently published a relevant book for this discussion, Workforce RX, Agile and Inclusive Strategies for Employers, Educators, and Workers. And I'm going to drop this link in the chat. And she also hosts a podcast by the same name, Workforce RX. So highly recommend you all take a look at Vaughn's book as well as her podcast. It's really brilliant leaders, truly the who's who in workforce joins Fon's podcast. Next up, we have Amy Kardel. Amy is Vice President for Strategic Workforce Relationships at CompTIA, which is the voice of the world's IT sector. She was previously chairwoman of the board of directors for 6 years. So she has both the expertise as a CompTIA SME, but also as a tech member of CompTIA Trade Association. She's on the advisory council of ConnectWise and previously was a tech entrepreneur. She was co-founder of Clever Ducks Computer Network Services and founder of Global Ascent Translation Services. Amy is also actually on an advisory board with New America, our New Models for Career Preparation Advisory Committee, which will interest this audience greatly. I'll drop the link in the chat. And the U.S. Department of Labor Advisory Committee on Apprenticeships. It was a new apprenticeship that was Apprenticeship Advisory Committee that was just established. So, and among Amy's many experiences, she was also a recent contestant on Wheel of Fortune. So Amy really has lots of expertise to share with us today. And last but not least, we have Marianne Pacelli, who's the division chief for network learning and strategic competitions with the NIST Holdings Manufacturing Extension Partnership Program at the Department of Commerce. Marianne oversees grants competitions and processes for all the MEP centers, which we'll learn about today, which are critical for manufacturing in the United States. She facilitates the dissemination of learnings and programs to the MEP centers all across the nation. And she also advises and advocates for manufacturing workforce policies with federal agencies, especially as they relate to the MEPs. She also co-facilitates the workforce directors networks of the federally supported Manufacturing USA Institutes. So Marianne has the perspectives of a manufacturing workforce professional at the federal level, but then in her past lives also worked in workforce development with MEPs and in the manufacturing community. So Marianne has a deep wealth of expertise in this space. So we all really have a rock star panel here today. The way we're going to divvy up our time is, first off, each of our panelists are going to take about 7 minutes to just give a little bit of their sector experiences and their industry experiences to give you all in the audience some ideas about what you should be thinking about when it comes to improving community college level STEM ed and workforce development. What should folks know? What issues are on their minds? What resources and organizations for you all should you all look to? And what would they like to see as folks who do this each and every day? So I'm going to start off with in reverse order for my introductions. And Marianne, you're first, starting with manufacturing. What would you share with the audience by way of direction as they prepare their submissions for JSPG and Sigma Xi?
Okay, I can unmute myself. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. Really excited to be here. First, just a couple words about NIST MEP. Maybe you don't know who we are. Manufacturing Extension Partnership is a 32, we started in 1988. It's a federally funded program. We are funded every year, actually separately, but we're housed in NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And our focus and our goal is to help small, mid-sized manufacturers grow. And so we look at what are their needs, and some of the spirit of the original Hollings grant was, how do we help small manufacturers adopt new technology, connect to federal labs, connect better to universities, and all this great advanced manufacturing. And back in 1988, it's manufacturing in a small company in Cleveland, Ohio, where I was. It's not what it is today, but it's growing. And so why do we care about manufacturing? Well, there's about 300,000 manufacturers in this country, and 290,000 of them are under 500 employees, the definition of small. And that is a significant part of the GDP of this country. So we believe, we think that, and we know that manufacturers are still a critical piece. And the pandemic this past 18 months has really shown, obviously, that we need to continue to support the manufacturing community here in the United States. Manufacturing accounts for about, and I have my notes here, we're about $2.5 trillion of the national GDP, which is about 11%. And while that might sound small, it is a significant piece of the GDP of this country. When you think of the number of manufacturing jobs in the US, about 12.2 million jobs, average hourly earnings for those people is about $29 an hour. And manufacturing right now as an employer is the fifth. The fifth industry in ranking. Trade and transportation is first. Education and health systems is the second highest employer. Government is the third highest employer. That's surprising. I would have thought they'd be second. Professional and business services and leisure and hospitality, not surprised. But manufacturing does weigh in at the fifth largest employer across the country. So you want to think about that. But the real challenge today, and NIST MEP and our centers do projects with companies. They go into a company, assess their needs, figure out what can we do? Can we help them adopt new technology? Do they need to improve their processes? Do they need to do better training of their workforce? Do they need to look at their culture? Do they need to develop new products? Can we help them export products to other countries to build their business? And really, we're doing a lot right now in helping connect supply chains within the country. Capacity and capability of companies within the country are here. We just need to connect them with their local and their U.S. supply chain and their customers a little bit stronger. So we're helping do that. And when we talk and work with a company, our centers, one of their evaluations, they are federally funded. They are not federal agencies. We have 51, one in every state, plus Puerto Rico. They receive basically grant funding through cooperative agreements from us. And in exchange for that, we ask them to tell us on a regular basis how many people they've worked with, what kinds of projects they've done. And we ask those companies to be surveyed by us, with a third party, to tell us what did they gain from it. So one of the big gains that we find that we get from our companies and our surveys is what's the economic impact? The economic impact of that company in relationship to the work that the MEP Center did. And we're not talking ROI, we're talking impact. So some of that impact is increase in sales, some of it is cost savings, and some of it is billions of dollars of new investment as a result of their work. Because many of our companies are now looking at how do they access new technology, are they investing stronger in R&D. So we ask our companies that, and we ask them some of their biggest challenges. What's your big challenge today? What's holding you back from growing? And while cost savings is traditionally always number one, employee recruitment and retention in the last 2 years has significantly been number two out of 5 or 6 different choices that they have, such as financing and access to technology. So we know that the employment piece, and there's lots of studies out there, and Deloitte's most recent study still says that in the next 2 to 5 years, there's going to be another 2 million openings in manufacturing. Now, over half of those openings are replacement headcount because of increase of automation and productivity. Manufacturing companies are not necessarily adding a lot of headcount, but they will be replacing a lot of headcount. And the jobs in these manufacturing companies are changing, and they're changing dramatically. So as a company automates, they don't need a frontline production worker, which is where 60 to 70% of most manufacturing jobs are, but they need somebody in a middle skill. They need somebody who can repair and maintain the equipment, who can program the equipment. And we're going to need more engineers and more thinkers to develop and design more products and design some of the equipment that they're using. So the challenges for these for our companies is finding them. And when we talk to our community colleges, So not surprisingly, they're having a same problem. They have programs, but they can't get enough people into them. So we all are working on how do we encourage more young people to consider careers in manufacturing, from frontline production to middle skill, where a community college degree really is a good fit. And that person can then move on to a four-year institution if they want to, into manufacturing technologies, manufacturing engineering, and or, hey, maybe they get their MBA and they learn to run the company. That's a good thing too. We need more of them. So the challenges that community colleges have that we see is some of it is the push and pull of the policies and the systems that they're in. Many states went to funding community colleges, all universities, based on completion of degrees. Well, not everybody needs a full degree right away out of community college. Community colleges serve a really great need for short-term programming. So we need our federal policies and our state programs to look at community colleges a little differently. And interesting, as new technology comes out, and I've in my work with the Manufacturing USA Institutes, many of our degreed engineers and technologists who already have four-year degrees and maybe even graduate degrees are going to need some upskilling themselves. And it's not necessarily they don't need to go back and get another engineering degree, but if they need to learn more about additive manufacturing or robotics engineering, a community college can actually fill that role too. And it's happening. But so we need to see more people getting into these roles, and community colleges need more support from their funding agencies so they can fill some of these community roles of not just educating people from the beginning, but also tapping into that workforce, an incumbent workforce, all the way up through degreed engineers when they need to. It's a very interesting piece. And I think community colleges are also in a unique position because many of them do dual credit with high school. And how do we help continue that dual credit piece? So to me, community colleges, our centers work with many community colleges across the country, working to connect them with small companies so that colleges learn what those needs are in those companies and how can those colleges then continue to support the training needs of the existing workforce. And we're all working on trying to fill the pipeline for the future workforce. Shalin?
Thanks so much, Marianne. So many nuggets there. I just want to do a quick poll. Type anything in the chat if you had manufacturing promoted to you as a career path when you were in high school. Anything. You could type A, B, C, 2, 1. Yeah, that sounds about right. So I think this would be a really fascinating paper topic. Okay, next up, we have Amy. Oh, great. We do have one person, Callie said. So Amy, same question for you. Community colleges, STEM ed, workforce, maximizing it. From your lens, working with tech companies, the tech sector, employers, what's top of mind for you? What's some direction folks could go in to really make some impact with their papers?
Well, I'm so glad you asked. I've been thinking a lot about this. And I think if we want to make impact, not only do we have to attract diverse talent, we have to retain it. And, you know, one of the most perplexing questions we have is, why does STEM leak so many women? And why does technology, the T in STEM especially, lose so many women as we go through? And I think there's a lot of research that needs to be done to understand that more. What is the juncture at which we lose women? What is the juncture that we lose other diverse talent groups? I think that's a really important question for us to answer, because we in STEM have been working on women in tech for a long time, and we can't even solve that problem. So understanding what's causing women to not stick in tech companies or not stick in STEM training, to me, is one of those just questions that keeps me up at night. And understanding that would make a big shift. You know, are we losing them in high school, college, in the workforce? You know, are we not getting enough numbers in the beginning? It might be interesting to compare an original pool of interest with a number of boys in that interest and see what happens, and really look at that question, because you know, we can do everything to bring workforce needs to the community college, but if we lose them once we train them, especially with diversity, it just, man, we're fighting an uphill battle. So that's a question I would say is an interesting research one for us at CompTIA. Let me tell you a little tiny bit about CompTIA too. So CompTIA is the Computer Trade Industry Association. Some of you all might be going, what's an industry association, right? What's a trade association? Well, that's when a group of companies in a sector like IT get together and say, hey, we have a common need, let's work together. And the common need that rallied us is workforce. All of our companies, big and small, need skilled workers. And we started in fulfilling that need with certifications back in the late 80s. And a certification was something that proved people had the skills to be able to do warranty work on PCs back in the day. And it's really grown from there. And the certification world is known through the A+ certification from us as the ticket into tech. It's kind of the first stop on a journey through our certifications that prove competency. And those things are done in high school, done in community colleges, done in workplace, done in workforce training around the world. So what goes into those certifications is what we know best, because that's our industry, and we bring SMEs together to do that. So we love being connected to industry, but what we need to do is connect to education. So I'm so glad to follow Marianne, because the idea of connecting with community colleges and how do we connect to the real gold standard of education, of course, is work-based learning. You know, how are you going to learn how to do something besides doing it? So we work a lot on apprenticeship, and we have some questions around that to talk about too. You know, we look at labor data, and we publish a lot of that. I'm going to put 2 links in the chat for you, cyberseek.org and cyberstates.org. You can really see what local market data is for the occupations we work with in cyber and IT. And, you know, we publish that based on publicly available data, but we really make it very digestible. So I think if you're doing research on the job market for IT, you'll want to know about those 2 resources. And by the way, what really is fascinating to me is behind those publicly available, you know, data points that move markets when the BLS speaks, you know, there's probably 2 PhDs in that office writing that report that comes out on Fridays. You know, it's interesting, and we have a lot less private data, but you know, we have this huge data pool called LinkedIn. And so I think one of the things that interests us is how do we bridge that publicly available data and LinkedIn data? If anyone wants to work on that and bring something around that to fruition, it's a problem. We don't have great visibility. We infer a lot, and we do what we can, but I think that LinkedIn connection and any longitudinal impact studies of education to isolate and account for variables is also really interesting, because we know our certs make a difference in the research we do in folks being employable, and looking at those issues around what makes a difference, and even down to the schools, you know, a school that has a strong STEM program, profiling one of those, and a school that doesn't, and really talking to the players. That's the parents and younger kids, of course, and the students themselves and the instructors, because the thing about technology that we think is so important is it's a base for so many things. There's a T in STEM, but there's a T in healthcare, you know, there's a T in manufacturing. So having a broad base in those tech subjects will really make things possible. So I'd also want to point you to a book that my boss, Charles, wrote around putting the T in STEM education. And I think that might be something to really think about too, like how parents are a big factor in what kids do and what students end up studying. So I think there's a lot of topics that are really relevant for us in workforce, because we have a huge skilled talent gap. You'll see that in our surveys and information, and we're trying to understand where's the leakage and how can we grow that larger. So I hope that gives you a little bit of background around what CompTIA's data is and the questions we're asking ourselves so that we can lift everyone into a high quality job through technology and also give base skills for other occupations with the T in STEM. It's my pleasure to meet with you today, and I look forward to any questions in the chat too. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Amy. Super, super insightful as always. Next, we have the perspective of a community college leader, as well as a little bit of the state lens. Vaughn, same question to you. Where should folks be thinking about? What issues are top of mind for you? And then also, if you could give us a little bit of a level set, if you will, on the role of community colleges and workforce development, that might be helpful too for the audience.
Well, thank you, Shalin and Nicole and Adriana for inviting me. So glad that I'm following Marianne and Amy. And for those of you who haven't lived in the workforce world for a period of time, the big difference between those who live in the pure higher education world versus the higher education plus workforce is that we follow the siren call of the employment, right? So where are the jobs, where are the skills, do students get employed? So it's not just completing your degree or certificate or credential, it's do they successfully land in a job market and they're successful in that realm. So in addition to some of the other hats, let me just pepper a little bit about the healthcare. In a conversation with the Atlanta Federal Reserve and McKinsey and Company, they had looked at the recovery of the United States. And basically in every state, healthcare popped up as one of the top industries that can facilitate recovery because healthcare has good jobs. And we need to be able to stair step all sorts of communities into those good jobs. You know, you're very aware of the sort of the kind of the banner jobs in healthcare, you know, the doctors and nurses. Futuro Health, we focus in the allied health area, and that's 65% of the healthcare workforce. It consists of these allied health workers. And that's roughly about a need of 2.3 million across all the states. And in California, where I'm located right now, it's roughly, we need like 500,000, 500,000 allied health workers over the next few years. Now you might be scratching your head and say, well, what's that word allied? So let me give you some examples. If you happen to go out and we're driving, and hopefully this doesn't happen to anybody, but let's say you got into a car accident. The emergency medical responder that comes in an ambulance to get you, to the person who checks you in at the hospital, is the medical assistant, for example, who takes your vitals and stats, who takes your x-rays, as well as sonograms and all of that, minus the doctors and the administrators. All of that workforce is allied health. And they're actually trained through a combination. Sometimes they're at the bachelor's, but largely they're at the level trained at community colleges. So AA degrees, certificates, and industry credentials. And the pandemic has very much shed light that this workforce is really important to us all. And none of us want to be short on this workforce when it comes to, you know, our own care and the care of our family. And so it's really important to be able to solve these massive gaps. When you're thinking about the big numbers that Marianne threw out, that Amy threw out, that I'm throwing out, you're talking about big industries that are all important to us, right? Because we're consumers of all these industries. But how do you begin to solve these problems, not solving, you know, 25 students at a time, 25 students at a time? Like, how do you begin to solve at scale, like massive scale, thousands and thousands at a time, in an inclusive way, right? With attention to, especially in healthcare, you want the workers to be reflective of the communities being served because you actually get better health outcomes that way. And then also sort of a newer factor, but not brand new, is agility. I mean, with the pandemic, for example, the skill sets shifted almost overnight, not just for those who are trained the sub-baccalaureate level, but even the doctors. The doctors had to cut over to telemedicine, and most of them kind of hate it because what it ended up doing is that they're dealing with a lot of tech support on the call that has nothing to do with the medical part of their interaction of the patient. So it's really amazing how this pandemic has taught us how short the shelf life of skills could be, and how important it is to be able to continually upskill in ways that are faster than just the unit of degrees, right? So this is about like, how do we get those skill sets more continuously, those skill sets upgraded more quickly and in an affordable way. So the biggest infrastructure we have that is ubiquitous across all states and the most affordable is the community colleges. And I would have to say, you know, just even on the California's diversity, if you're diverse and you make it to post-secondary education, the likelihood, just from a pure stats, is that your first step will have been to the community college rather than the four-year system, just from a pure numbers. And so like you've all heard of the University of California system, like UC Berkeley, UCLA. That system, 40% of the majors in that system came through the community colleges. So that's one path where you save some money by doing your core curriculum, your general education curriculum at a community college, and then you transfer into the four-year system to make it more affordable. So that's one purpose of the community college. And then the second purpose is also, there's so many what I call STEM technician careers, right? STEM technician careers, they could be like a radiology technician, medical sonographers. Oh my goodness, they're licensed vocational nurses. There's so many of these careers that do not necessarily require a four-year degree. Health IT specialists, for example. So these are all careers that could start at the community college level and allow someone to be able to, with under a 2-year investment from affordability, have a good landing in a career and then begin to move upward there. So I'll just end by telling a quick story. When I came from the energy sector, I worked with a set of colleges to create a 1-year program in electrical and power line transmission system, because we were trying to repopulate our sort of our entry level line worker. Like if your power went out in the middle of the night, the people who come to fix it would be the line workers, right? So we were trying to create that pool in a diverse way, have a reliable quality talent pool. What was interesting is when it came to enrollment, there were all these engineers that came into this class, and we were wondering, why are there engineers coming into this 1-year certificate program? So what it turned out was that they, you know, if you think about your engineering degrees, there's your, you know, your general ed courses, and then you start to specialize, like in the major. Well, the shelf life of their major had gotten stale. So they were really coming back to the community college to restack their credential, and they came to get that 1-year credential to be relevant, and none of them needed help on career placement because they were capable of doing that themselves, and they went on and off, and you know, those careers were like 120K when they exited. So what you're beginning to see is sort of like the hierarchies, the traditional hard hierarchies of these systems are not holding. There's sorts of unbundling and rebundling that individuals are doing in order to stay relevant for employment. And I hope we get into this discussion a little bit later, but maybe that gives you a little detail.
Thanks so much, Fawn. So we've gone through manufacturing, tech, and health at the industry, government, and the college lenses. So really an interesting matrix for those of you all who want to build a career in this space, right on this topic. Now we're going to dive into questions. As Nicole mentioned, please feel free to drop any questions in the chat, or you can message Adriana or Nicole or myself, and we'll add them to the queue. We do actually have some questions from our RSVP form, so I'm going to dive into some of those with our panel here. So this question is actually an interesting conversation starter. It comes from Andrew George from Sigma Xi, one of the organizing partners. So let's say you have a magic wand. What is the one policy that you would add, remove, or modify that you think would have an immediate impact in a big way? One sort of policy. Why don't we start with you, Vaughn?
I believe the biggest impediment to enough people understanding the STEM occupations that are out there and making wise decisions when it comes to their majors, their minor, or their education pathway is the lack of awareness that these occupations exist. So if you just look at just the numbers, the #1 major for the Latino community is early childhood education. The #1 major for the African American community is social work. Now, I would argue, like, why do you pick those? They are valuable. Why do you pick those versus, for example, healthcare, a number of the healthcare occupations? It's largely because a lot of the healthcare occupations don't roll off your tongue. They're not discussed over the dinner table. And so how else do you find out that there are these good jobs that exist out there so that you can get ready in the right sequence? And based on a number of task forces that I've been on, that career exploration, that conversation needs to start as early as middle school in order to ready students for the right, especially the math sequence to pursue what they need. So I would highly encourage early career exploration in our public policies.
That's really great, Vaughn. Marianne, Amy?
First I'll ditto what Vaughn said. We need to have funding to help schools do that early middle school career exploration. Their challenge is they're hamstringed. I mean, they can't, they're not measured on that. And we need to probably change some of that. And the other policy, and it is being kicked around right now, is on funding for non-degree programs, such as Pell Grants and even, I'm not sure I want to go down the path of student loans, but Pell Grants for short-term certificates that lead to gainful employment. Right now, the cost is high for community college to put those on because they don't receive a lot of state reimbursement, and there's a need for individuals to be able to tap into those programs and be able to get some of that employment once they're out of school.
Amy?
And I'll jump in and say it always starts with a job, and making things easier for employers to connect in a policy way. Coming from the employer space, I see the labyrinth of how to navigate WIOA funding, it's just, it's time for some updates to our system to make it easier for employers. And I think the caution against fraud is important, but at the same time, making it really accessible for companies to realize all the funding they can tap into. I'm a Californian and we have employment training panel. It's awesome, but most people don't even know about it as employers, and it's a little too complicated to figure out. So I think some policy shifts on making the employer more involved in the producer of talent and making it easier for them to tap into funds and put that back into the employer side of things through apprenticeship, et cetera. But look at how we can streamline that funding stream, because we have the funding sources. I think the policy is just a bit archaic.
Those are some great ideas. Our next question is, I'm going to take a little bit of an editorial license with this question here. Someone in the audience raised, what kinds of programs or policies in place to help community college students access research opportunities? And I'm going to actually flip that a little bit. I'm going to ask the panel, because I like to be a rabble rouser. Do you see value? So, university students, undergraduate research, it's something that you may do. Do you see value in expanding undergraduate or research opportunities to community college students? And if so, then the first question would love your thoughts on it.
I'll come out and say boldly no. I think if the research results in teamwork and workplace learning in some way, I would then say yes. I think the ability to solve a problem and work with others is absolute. We're trying to build upon, but research for research sake, I wouldn't expect deep and big outcomes from the community college level. But I'm hopeful that my panel will take issue with that.
I'm going to tackle this one a different way. Oh, go ahead, Marianne.
Oh, okay. I was just going to say, there are pockets of that happening across the country. The Manufacturing USA Institutes and just some other community colleges that have strong relationships with their universities. And maybe it's not as much pure research as much as it's applied research, so that community college students are working in some two-year degree programs that are fairly technical, and they can be part of research projects that are maybe applied research working with a company. And I've seen it really generate a tremendous amount of interest on the student level. And many of them move on into four-year degrees.
So I'll tackle this from a different level. I think there's so much data right now. What we're missing across the country is acumen on how to make that data actionable in education. I would tell you, in my when I stepped in at the Vice Chancellor of the California Community Colleges, a dean at one of our conferences stood up and said, "Vaughn, you must free the data." I said, "What is he talking about? What am I freeing? You know, did the state like put it in a box and put a key on it?" No, it turns out that the data would be submitted to the state. And so there's inventory, like massive amount of data, but because of the sophistication at the state level or in any of these public agencies is limited when understanding how to make data actionable, that it wasn't being returned back into the colleges to be useful, right? So, a few things that were done. I mean, we really thought about what are the data tools that could make the data actionable. So for example, I'm going to put some links in here. We developed the salary surfer, which correlated every single degree, every single certificate of every single college in along every single, whether it's IT or manufacturing or healthcare or general education, and showed the earning power 2 years before students started and 2 years and 5 years after. That gave students some insights. We also created the launch board, which was now directly into the targeted at colleges and their practitioners, because what was happening was that, for example, there was a group of faculty sitting in San Diego. They looked at the enrollment, they said, "Wow, it's completely full as a class, good for us." And they said, "Wow, 100% completion. We're so great, good for us." And then they looked at the workforce outcome. Did these students get employment? And nobody got employment. And that catalyzed a set of different conversation on maybe we need to talk about, you know, what's going on with our student, and we need to rethink our program. And that's the power of the data tools. So take a look at the launch board. And then one last point, there was a researcher from University of Michigan who began to really understand higher education data and really looked at the community college data. And he determined that there was a sequence of course taking that was unusual. It wasn't set up in the traditional path of just degrees, that students were picking certain courses, and they were called skill builder sequences. And he was able to correlate that these students were actually making logical choices in terms of combining different courses that actually resulted in significant earning power, but colleges did not acknowledge them as workforce programs because they weren't bundled into, you know, a formal sequence. And that's called skill builder. And wow, that was powerful. And that changed once that came about and we understood that, we actually began to incorporate that into our systems metrics. So it wasn't just, did you successfully complete or transfer? Now in the workforce, it was, did you break living wage? Did you have a significant wage gain, such as the skill builder sequence? Did you get employment in the field that you studied? So these are all like, you know, this is the power of like the research community bringing bear into the reforms of community colleges and higher education.
Absolutely. A really great response there. Next question picks up on what Marianne had actually touched on in her comments. So, you know, we're talking STEM ed here. There's innovation and R&D happening in tech and manufacturing and health. When it comes to this idea, I like to frame it, aligning technology and talent development. What ideas do you all have? You know, this is a science policy audience. These are folks who think about federally funded research, federally funded innovation, tech transfer, that whole area of work. What are some ideas or breadcrumbs that folks could follow if they're interested in bringing workforce development upstream to the point of technology development in your respective fields? And do you see any policy or practices that folks should be thinking about to facilitate that when it comes to the programs that a community college would offer their students? Amy?
A couple of things I'd like to jump in with. I haven't talked enough about apprenticeship, Shalin. You know, that's one of those horses I like to ride, but the model of learning and earning at the same time is so important. And it's the gold standard in work-based learning. So looking at apprenticeship closely for what that can do in STEM, something I think is really important. It's supposed to really be the either entry level or upskilling potential earn and learn opportunity. But, you know, one of the interesting things we're seeing is that entry level jobs are sort of being hollowed out. The employers increasingly want someone to start, you know, they say it's 0 to 2 years of experience or could maybe be done by an apprenticeship, but gosh, what they're asking for is more and more. So some people call that like over-speccing or job grade inflation. You know, the wages are low, but they want more. There's sort of this market disconnect. And I'm not sure how you could study and write about that, but what does it mean for employers, you know, when they're doing that? And you could probably do some back testing of job descriptions at the same employer over time and really look and see where that's going. Or, you know, dummy resumes, do some testing with dummy resumes and see if you put a certification on there and it gets to the first round of interviews, or if you put an apprenticeship on there and see if it gets to the first round of interviews. So many of those resumes are being filtered by, you know, software programs now anyway. It'd be interesting to see what kind of lift you can give. You could test different things on dummy resumes and see where you could end up. Because I think what we're trying to figure out is how to crack that integration between education and vocation. And those are the questions I'm asking myself around that. Thanks.
It's an interesting question, and there is some stuff going on, not necessarily research, but some practical applications where, as Amy said, you know, the hollowing out of the entry-level workforce is happening because of automation and production, and it's not always a bad thing. I mean, we have states that have like 1% unemployment. They can't find enough people. They have to automate. But as they do that, their incumbent workforce has to change and has to learn more. And then as they go to replace those people and add more people as they grow, it's difficult for education to keep up quickly. But there are, we need to help manufacturers and be able to provide some assistance for them to do some of this competency matching and understanding more of skill gaps, being able to evaluate a skill gap of a person just because they may have worked at McDonald's. They have some skills. And what are those skills and how quickly can I train them? And how can the education community be part of that fairly quickly? Again, we may be looking at non-degree programs early on, but the policies and the practices and the funding situations to help take somebody who needs 2 of the 5 courses and get those to them so they can be productive in the workplace. And some of it is the incumbent workforce and some of it is the new workforce. But there are some things like that going on. ONET does some competency matching and gap creation. The Manufacturing Institute ARM, the Advanced Robotics Institute, has a website called roboticscareer.org. And they're starting to do that. How do you find somebody, and what's the holes that need to be filled in order to take somebody with one set of skills and move them fairly quickly into a new job? So some more research on that would be very helpful.
I'm a big fan of a model that came out, and it was through one of these, you know, national federal grants that align tech, but was very intentional about thinking through the skill sets and therefore wove in a workforce element. How it manifested was, there were a set of grants issued at the federal level. One was around flexible, flexible fabric, technologies embedded in fabrics, basically. And our state won one of them, and it was called NextFlex. So it led by manufacturers, but it called out specifically to do workforce development and with certain tiers of education, like the community colleges. So what a wonderful model. And it unleashed some creativity. So what they decided to do was create these Shark Tank competition where students, they were groups of community college students, but then they also went down to the high school to give them early exposure to this world of flexible manufacturing, fabric manufacturing. And they all had a business case competition. They pitched about products. So like there was one team that wanted to create baby outfits and baby booties that had the technology embedded. So then if the baby stops breathing, it would trigger off some alarms. I mean, how clever. Or creating compression socks where the technology would then regulate the heat and the pressure. So this unleashed a set of creativity amongst the student, engaged them in their learning. And I could see in the audience as they were making these pitch, some of those students will go on to do PhDs, master's, advanced degrees. Others will go do STEM technician types of careers and with training housed at the community college. And I think that, again, I'm going to tie it back. That was a great example of early exposure to possible career options. And it opened everybody's eyes in diverse communities and was very effective because it was done with intention at the national level in these newer areas of technology.
Thanks so much. Great insights there. Our next question comes from Callie Chappelle. I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly. What is the role of informal science spaces like maker spaces or community labs in supporting workforce development in STEM with community colleges?
I love the maker movement, and actually I funded the largest adoption in any higher education system of the maker movement. It was 24 community colleges building maker spaces. I mean, they come in different names, but the reason why we did it was one of the skill sets so important moving in the future is actually the 4 C's. So creativity, collaboration, communication. What's my 4th C? Creativity, communication. I'll think of it in a second. Critical thinking, that's it. Critical thinking. And spaces like the maker spaces facilitate the development of those transferable skills.
Amy, Marianne, anything to add on that?
IT's less in the makerspace for sure, but I would say that the other role of community labs is pretty big. We have these little coding and cyber clubs popping up lots of places, and we offer a lot of resources to them, and they're always kind of surprised there is an industry association with information for them. But I think that sort of organic thing happens. People just want to figure it out. So I see that movement in coding and cyber meetups too.
Yeah, I have one resource for you all who are interested in this lens. JSPG and AAAS actually organized a webinar for the Endless Frontier issue where we had Erica Kimmerling from Aztec talk about the public engagement in science and tech aspects of science policy. She's now running that for the White House, but would encourage you all to go review that recording on the JSPG YouTube channel, because in that conversation, there were different resources brought up when it comes to equipping a broader group of people with science and tech oriented, I don't want to say assets, but assets. I mean, physical infrastructure for learning and tinkering and that kind of thing. So just a kernel there. And I'll try to dig up the link as well as we go along. Okay, we have about 15 minutes left, so I'm going to try to go a little bit faster with my questions. Vaughn, this question is actually for you. You know, our authors in the audience and in the science policy community at large mostly have come from these R1, R2 research universities, you know, the research institutions. What is, and you touched on this a little bit in your opening comments, what are one or two misconceptions that you think the research university community or the sort of science and tech community might have about community colleges?
You know, I was educated in probably more the traditional academic pathway representative of many folks on this phone. So I was less exposed to the community college and really what are career technical education program. And, you know, I've spoken, you know, Brookings Institute, you know, RAND, you know, many bodies where I think we all come in with our understanding based on our own education. So the biggest aha to me was really learning what these career education programs were about. And I had the misconception that, oh, people want to work with their hands, and that's why they go into career technical education. So when I was with in the energy sector, we actually did a set of focus groups. And what the candidates were saying back to us was that it's not about working with my hands. It's that I can't stand being confined in a cubicle or an office. So if you want me to pursue, you know, all this education just so that I can graduate and be behind a cubicle, that it's like suffocating. I mean, it's really interesting to hear people talk. And so that really opened up my mind to understand that, you know, people choose different pathways and different careers for other considerations. I mean, all of us who've been super successful in our academic pathway may not fully appreciate that there's different matches. And so that was really helpful for me to understand that people have these different preferences. And so they're a better match for some of these career options. And what my company did was, instead of trying to recruit using certain pictures, we began to put out photos of, hey, you can be climbing poles in the blue sky. You can be hanging off helicopters and fixing power lines from the air. I mean, those are super skilled, highly dangerous, so you have to be quite skilled. But it appealed to different populations than perhaps those that have been very successful behind cubes and walls, which has been my career.
That's terrific. Thanks so much for that, Vaughn. Marianne, this next question's for you. So you talked about this a little bit in your opening remarks too. There are a wide array of federal workforce programs that support community colleges with manufacturing. Some of them are in NIST, some of them are in labor, some of them are in NSF with ATE. You know, what is some research questions that you have for the audience who want to look at coordinating these different federal agencies and the manufacturing workforce programs that they have to offer? Are there any things in particular that you would really like some deep thinking on?
Yeah, some of it I can share, and maybe some of it I might not want to. But no, there's a plethora of workforce funding available. Department of Labor has funded projects at the community college level for probably over 10 years. And there's been some tremendous programs that have been developed as a result of that, along with NSF, National Science Foundation, through their ATE program, Advanced Technological Education. And then, of course, just your traditional WIOA, and now it's WIOA, Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act. Funding in the state levels is made available from the federal office, and in many states it flows through community colleges to help with incumbent worker training and new pipeline, developing the pipeline of new employees for all sectors, not just manufacturing. I think it would be interesting to look at the amount of replication that has happened, and also to take a look at where there are gaps not done. my experience of just looking out at it over the last many years, I saw a lot of replication of similar programs, and the question was there a need for that, or did we not fill a gap of technical training, developing new programming that needs to be developed? And the other piece is the speed to market, and that's a challenge, I know, for at the education level, because in your individual states you're controlled by what you have to do to develop new programming. But that's, what are those gaps, and what are the challenges that community colleges have in getting a new program to the marketplace before the technology changes again? And those are some of the big challenges that they have.
Marianne, just a quick follow-up. Do you have a resource for folks to learn about where all of the manufacturing workforce programs live in the federal government?
There isn't one. However, there is, if you go in at Department of Labor, you can, I think it's their workforce GPS program, and gosh, I have to dig deep and see if I can get you there is now a website in the federal government of all the Department of Labor ones that were funded, and you can go to NSFATE, as somebody put in the, Shalin, you put in the chat. They also have a very specific place, the catalog, so to speak, of all the programs that they have funded. When you get outside of that, there's not too much else.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. Well, hey,
yeah.
that's a writing idea in of itself, codifying all of the manufacturing workforce funding or programs out there.
Right.
Amy, this next question is for you, and it ties back to the apprenticeships comment. So, excuse me. When folks think about apprenticeship programs, they might think of the skilled trades, they might think of manufacturing, they might not think of careers in tech and IT. Could you tell us a little bit about what CompTIA has been doing around tech entrepreneurships and tech apprenticeships, and how apprenticeships could lead to different kinds of jobs?
Sure. I think you're right. The idea of an apprenticeship in these newer occupations is new. And what that looks like, an apprenticeship is a job, and it has three components. It's, you have a mentor, you have a curriculum that you're following in a classroom type setting, and you're learning hands-on. So those three things make an apprenticeship. And what we said, hey, CompTIA is experts on what it takes for job tasks in tech. We know that curriculum. So we created national guidelines that we've shared and have been blessed by the U.S. Department of Labor. And those are available at the CompTIA Apprenticeships for Tech website. And I'll put a link in the chat. And we've been working to expand with US DOL partners, also Mayor and Mayor, who are experts on setting up apprenticeships. So we're partnering with community colleges and employers directly. Anyone who wants to use our standards is free to use them. And we're trying to help people fish. We're not fishing, but we're teaching them how to fish for apprentices to build their workforce and make it easy for them, between Mayor's expertise on connecting to other intermediaries to help with the apprenticeship side of things, and our technical expertise on what it takes to do a job role. So that's the big work we're up to. And we see that as having huge potential, and we're getting traction. We've been at this for 6 months live in the market. But our standards are free for everybody to share, and they're on our website, and you can learn all about it there. I'll put that in the chat. Thanks.
Oh, that's fantastic. Also wanted to flag another resource you all may be interested in. There's actually now this is a company, it's not a community college, but there's actually a company called Multiverse that has started working with big tech companies, Cisco, Facebook, Verizon, that are looking to pioneer the apprenticeship model for different kinds of occupations in the tech sector too. They started in the UK actually, but they've just come to the US as of this year. So it might be an interesting model to look at if you're thinking at how community colleges can be mindful of, well, frankly, the competition out there from the for-profit sector, from the nonprofit sector. There's lots of places folks can go to gain skills. And thinking about that would be maybe another interesting topic for a paper. One project that actually we have underway at New America is looking at the enrollment decline at community colleges and how that can be reversed. And we're actually meeting with students who chose not to go back to the community college to figure out what was sort of the, why was that? Was it the financial? Was it the time? Was it COVID? Was it that they found a better option? And very, 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 very preliminary. We're just starting this. But that latter piece is not as uncommon as you might guess. So food for thought. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. So this is sort of a bigger question from the audience. Is there anything at the federal policy level that can improve the coordination and the transitions between high school, community college, and four-year universities in STEM that you all would flag up as an interesting research topic or an interesting thing to dig into? Or maybe, I guess another way to frame that is there a barrier that's getting in the way of that coordination for happening?
I don't see a federal policy barrier per se. I think it's at the state level, and it actually gets down to the institution level. And I don't, my experience, and I've worked across the country and, in the state of Ohio for many years with community colleges and universities. And in many times, it's the institutions have to have some encouragement to make it happen. The policies exist for 2+2+2+2 programs, going from career technical education in high school to be able to get dual credit and moving to community college and transferring that into a four-year university. It happens in some states better than others, and I think it's really at the state level, not necessarily the federal level. But maybe my community college friend Vaughn, is there anything that's really blocking that?
We need incentives that call for that. What I worry about is we're playing yesterday's game and not tomorrow's. So let me throw out some numbers. 10.9 million open jobs, 8.4 million unemployed people who can't get their way to those jobs. There's flatlining or declining K-12 population. Right? So enrollment is going to be a big issue for all higher education institutions. I really believe action is going to be at the adult level. How to facilitate learning the way adults need to learn in an accelerated way with the kind of skill sets that are needed by industry. And there's very little research, we just don't know enough, and we need more sophistication in those areas.
Absolutely. Well, folks, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. It's Friday afternoon. Thank you so much to our distinguished panel for this really fantastic conversation. We covered manufacturing, health, tech, government, industry, college. Thank you to the JSPG team for organizing this, and good luck to you all on your papers. Please reach out if we could be a resource. And Nicole, back to you.
Thank you so much. Excellent panel. Really enjoyed the entire thing. We just want to thank, of course, our moderator and our panelists for this great discussion today. And we also want to thank our participants for joining us on this Friday afternoon. We also like to thank our issue sponsors, Sigma Xi and Shalin, for partnering with us on this event, and to our JSPG team for their help planning this event. Specifically, we want to thank Sahil Mehta for our Senior Director of Communications and Media Relations, and our CEO, of course, Adriana Bankston, for all of her help in planning this event. Please feel free to reach out to any of us if you have questions about the call for papers for this special issue. And we also encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can keep in touch with our upcoming events, and also you can take a view of this recording later on if you would like to view it again. Again, we're going to place the link for all of our events in this chat. And I'm also going to screen share really quickly to let you all know of our upcoming event that will be taking place for our writing workshop. So we have an excellent writing workshop coming up that's going to be very focused on how to write these op-eds and write these policy position papers as it relates to the special call for issues. We'll hear from our JSPG. This workshop will be on November 6th and 7th, as you can see, and it's going to coincide with the Sigma Xi annual meeting and student research conference. We'll have a keynote speaker, JSPG Governing Board member Deborah Stein, and it's going to be a wonderful opportunity to prepare your submission for this special call to papers. So we'll hope you'll register. We're going to place the link for the registration in the chat as well. And we hope to see you at that event in a couple of weeks. So thank you again for joining us and have an excellent weekend.